When You Love Someone in Recovery, featuring Caroline Beidler. In this episode of Talking Addiction Recovery podcast, we sit down with Caroline Beidler, author of When You Love Someone in Recovery, a hopeful guide to understanding addiction. Caroline shares her deeply personal recovery journey, beginning in her teenage years, and how her lived experience shaped her work supporting families impacted by substance use disorder. Together, we explore what recovery looks like beyond sobriety, and why families often feel lost in outdated narratives about addiction. This conversation challenges long held ideas like enabling and reframes how we understand support, boundaries, and connection. Caroline emphasizes that recovery is not an individual process, it is relational, communal, and ongoing. We dive into why families need education and accurate recovery information, the emotional impact of grief and loss and addiction, how neuroscience and lived experience reshape recovery understanding, practical ways families can show up without shame or judgment, and why hope is not passive, it's an active recovery strategy. This episode is for anyone supporting a loved one, working in behavioral health, or seeking a more compassionate and informed understanding of addiction and recovery.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
Caroline Beidler, MSW, is an author, speaker, and managing editor of Recovery.com, where she combines research and expert insight on addiction and mental health. Drawing from her own recovery journey, she is the founder of the Women's Recovery Leadership Foundation and helps others find healing through her newsletter and podcast, Circle of Chairs, which reaches thousands weekly. Caroline's next book, When You Love Someone in Recovery, is a compassionate and practical guide to understanding addiction and supporting loved ones through recovery. You can learn more about Caroline and the work she does in the podcast notes. On this episode of Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast, we want to welcome Caroline Beidler to the episode. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you for having me, Andrew. I love connecting with a fellow Wisconsinite, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and you and I, we know some familiar places and people. You've been all around lately too, so I really appreciate you being able to settle down for today and speak with me because what you've done recently with your book and some of other things has sent you quite a bit of different places, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Before we do, can you give the audience just a little bit of a background about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up in Wisconsin, a small town, and I'd say I grew up in a pretty typical home for typical being like broken, tough, a lot of trauma, right? I think when I first entered recovery, I thought I was unique and that my story was like full of pain and hardship and struggle. And yes, it was, but I'd learned through the journey that I've been on that I'm definitely not the only one, and a lot of us, most of us in addiction recovery, substance use disorder recovery, identify with a lot of times having a tough, growing up. And so I just remember really early on feeling lost and I don't know the word like untethered. I just had this feeling of angst, and I just remember also feeling very alone and different. And I think because I had experienced some really hard things at an early age, because I felt like I didn't have a foundation, because I didn't know how to cope with some of the feelings I was having even then, I started turning towards drug and alcohol use very, very early. And so I, quickly spiraled out of control. And by, 14, 15, I was deep in a substance use disorder. And by 17, starting my addiction treatment journey. And from 17 to 28, which is quite the span of time, I was kind of in and out of sobriety, tried different approaches of treatment, counseling, But it wasn't until I connected with communities of recovery and really felt a connection that my journey changed. And so, what I've learned over the past since starting my recovery journey is that recovery is about more than stopping something. You know, it's about more than just sobriety. Is part of why I'm so passionate about being an advocate today. I want everyone to understand, family members, loved ones, and those of us like struggling, that when we begin this process of recovery, sobriety can be just the beginning. And there's so much more that goes into it. And life gets so good. Like I remember when I first started like trying to be sober, you know, white knuckling it without support and stringing a couple days together. I just remember thinking like my life is over. You know, there's nothing to live for. Sobriety is just, it's going to be have something I have to endure. I'm going to be missing out. And the truth is, that's just not the case. Like life, you know, as we know, it gets so good and it's so full. Now, is it always easy? No. I've gone through really tough things in recovery. And the good news is I get to show up for all of life today. And it's an incredible way to live. And so, you know, since finding recovery, I've always been a helper. And so even when I struggled with substance use disorder, you know, undiagnosed PTSD, other mental health conditions, I was giving back and being of service. And looking back, I didn't realize it at the time, but, you know, supporting older adults and working in group homes and with folks with differing abilities. And I just always had a heart to help others. And I've always loved writing. And I remember even as a little girl when I struggled, I would just, books were just such a comfort to me. And I had this dream when I was a little girl of being an author. And I have this actually, it's in my desk. I still have it, but I wrote, it was like a poster I made, and it, you know, it had like my first book title and a picture of me, and, you know, you know, my name was different then before marriage, but, um, so I had these dreams, loved writing, loved books, loved helping people. And it's so interesting how those things have kind of come together now later in life, you know, and so I'm able to give back and be of service to the community through writing, through advocacy, through speaking. And I've done all sorts of different things from, you know, leading a recovery community organization, creating statewide peer support programs, recovery housing, collegiate recovery. I've just been involved in filling the gaps of where I've seen needs. And yeah, so anyways, that's a little bit about me, but I'm just really grateful to be here today and to be talking about recovery, which is my absolute favorite thing.
Yeah, that's a beautiful introduction. Like that is amazing to hear, not just the story, the passion, but even what it has led you to and other things like that. And one of the things that we're going to talk about a lot is your book, which was recently published, When You Love Someone in Recovery. I'm always looking for more resources for those impacted by someone's addiction, you know, family members, loved ones, because I always get the sense that there's not enough out there. And so you wrote a book that is about loving someone in recovery, and not even necessarily like when you love someone who's addicted or when you love someone who has an addiction, but you talk about when you love someone in recovery. So where did all of this inspiration come from to write a book with that specific focus?
Yeah, well, you know, I mentioned in a lot of my program development work, um, it was like I just had this vision for the need, you know, and so as I've been writing and I have a couple other books, when I approach a new project, I really, and you may appreciate this, just love research. You know, I love like digging into what's there, what do we have, what's missing, and what are some of the like misconceptions that we really need to start addressing and focusing on. And I started to see this huge need for resources, just like you shared, for the people that love us. You know, we have a lot of, we like to call it quit lit, you know, memoirs, books about our recovery experience, which is incredibly important. We need those books. We need those books. Stories are so powerful and healing, and families need to be equipped, because I think there's been so much misinformation, from like the war on drugs to this is your brain on drugs to tough love to all of these ideas that we've heard over the past several decades. Many of them born from a good place of wanting to help and be helpful and support. And some of those things have done a lot of damage. And so I think as advocates, we need to kind of step into those places where we need to start thinking about, okay, what has changed? What needs to be reframed? What new information do families need because of the new information we have, the neuroscience um, information about actually like the evidence base behind recovery, long-term recovery practices? How do we get there? We need to share this. And so I have to say, and you might tell I get all giddy thinking about research, but it's fun. Like it's so exciting to me to pull in all these different places and evidence based information and the stories. My writing. If you've read my other books or this one, I have to include people's stories, and so I got to do some interviews and things like that. But yeah, I mean, going back to your question, it's where is the need in our community, and stepping into that need. And so hopefully, I've been able to do that with this book. And I think, there's other needs out there that we need more books for. So,
And one thing I think is what stands out about your book, different than a lot of others I've read with the purpose of towards family members, loved one, is like your part one starts with what is recovery. Normally books start about what is like addiction, and it talks about all these things. So when we talk about like psychoeducation, we talk about all this, like there is such I feel a higher emphasis put on understanding addiction. And then when people enter recovery or go into treatment, they're sort of like this, all right, like let's hope they get better. Let's hope things go well. We know if they stop using, then that means everything's going to get better. And we all know like that is not what happens. So I believe in a, good place. We have filled education and support on the addiction side and have sort of left the recovery side to sort of just take care of itself for family members. But a lot of family members and loved ones don't even fully understand what recovery is or what it takes, what it is like for part of it. We highlight so much of the addiction, which is what a lot of them have experienced too. Like that's what they've gone through is loving someone who is like going through an addiction. We don't always talk as much about the recovery thing. I think it's sort of presented as this thing that's going to take care of everything and solve stuff. So
mm,
we're like, well, it'll speak for itself when no, we need to speak about it. And that's where you started is what is recovery?
mm. Yeah, well, an excellent point. And I have to thank my brilliant editor actually made that suggestion. And so I have to shout out Nelson Books and Brigitte Nortker for that. But, I think, and it's an excellent point because I remember my own parents and loved ones thinking I would go to addiction treatment, inpatient treatment or even counseling. And once this amount of time is over, I would come back and I would be cured. In the book, I talk about it like taking an antibiotic, right? 10 days of treatment to, take them twice a day. And then after 10 days, you're good. That's not how recovery works. And so, what I was finding as a recovery advocate, I've spent years researching recovery. SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, has an excellent page on their website. What is recovery? It goes into all of these different pillars, and it's about physical health and community and giving back. And but are we sharing that information? Like, is it going beyond research and federal agencies to actual families and around kitchen tables where, I want my loved ones to understand, yeah, addiction treatment likely needs to be a part of my journey. And recovery is about so much more. So I want my loved ones to understand it's also about my mental health. And you know what? It wasn't until 5 years of sobriety that I discovered how deeply I needed to address my mental health. It's about physical health. I've learned I talk about recovery being a very embodied experience. I had to start to feel safe in my body, and that didn't happen until much later into my sobriety. So there's all these other pieces. And I think when we look at the research, Andrew, of rates of recurrence of use, relapse, I like to say recurrence of use, it's a bit less stigmatizing. But if we look at rates of recurrence of use, they're through the roof. I mean, between 40 and 60% of people will have a recurrence of use. Or if you are using substances like nicotine and opioids, that could be upwards of 90%. So families, and I talk a lot about this in the book, need to understand, okay, recurrence of use can also be a part of the journey. And if this is happening, let's think more holistically about what recovery is and what we're aiming towards. Not just stopping something. Maybe there's something else going on. And so the book is really for family members and loved ones. It's also for us. I mean, it's also for people who are inner seeking recovery, because I think we all need a bigger understanding, a better understanding of what recovery is. And I know learning about it, my own family, it's changed my life. I mean, and it's made my recovery, I don't want to say stronger or more solid, because when we do that, then we're on slippery ground. But it's helped me get a fuller understanding of how I need to pour into my life and continue to do that, to stay healthy and whole, and my family as well. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And it's really important that we share what we know and what the research has showed us over the past couple of decades with everyone.
And speaking about that, you mentioned that what kind of what started is the research and thinking about like where we were. I always think like one of the things that comes to mind is what got you here won't get you there, and kind of
Mm,
realizing that there were things that I thought was the way we did it. I thought that was the right thing, but come to find out that isn't the best way, or we've learned new ways. So I want to tie in kind of like two pieces of this is I'm curious some of the reactions or responses you've gotten from people because your book does challenge some of the traditional or some of the longstanding views. Like you talk about enabling is a myth, which I'm so grateful that you tackled that topic. Uh, there's another one that you talked about too, which I don't think we talk about enough, which was on page 106, was about allowing consequences or natural consequences versus sometimes piling on consequences. I
mm,
sometimes think something happens and we don't allow the natural consequence to happen. We pile on consequences, and then it, you don't always learn from that because you didn't really get to experience what just naturally happened as a result of my behavior.
mm.
So throughout the book, you challenge and kind of discuss some of the traditional longstanding views that's common among in the profession and with family members and loved ones. So thinking about that, how has the response been? Have you had people talk about that or bring that up, or have you had people who are, oh, I didn't think about it this way, or that helped me to see it differently? Because these are some things that have been quite present in this area for a long time.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, you're actually the first person that's asked me that question. So I appreciate it so much. Honestly, when the book came out, I was like, oh no. I was I was bracing myself even in the beginning. There was a part about kind of listing off different types of recovery pathways and saying, not all of these are going to work. And it's not to discourage loved ones and family members, but it's just to say, like, we might need different things at different times. And it is an individualized path. But like you shared, yes, I challenge a lot of the longstanding notions that we've heard for a long time. And surprisingly, there hasn't been pushback. There's been this, oh, okay, kind of this, almost this like pausing and wow. Um, uh, People, I think, are ready to hear something else, because what we've been doing for a long time in terms of just even how we understand recovery, it just hasn't been working. And I think people are ready for something else and ready to learn something new. And so I'm really encouraged by that. Again, I was bracing myself for some fallout and pushback, and maybe that's happened and I just haven't heard about it yet. And that's okay. I think, I've learned in my own journey, we have to be okay with having uncomfortable conversations. And part of what I needed to do with this book was, what does the research say? What does our experiences say? And share that. And I think I've had so many conversations, especially with mothers who have loved children struggling with substance use disorder, some who have passed away due to their addiction, some who have found long term sustained recovery. And the threads throughout those conversations are all the same. And that's, we can't focus on enabling. We cannot just think about tough love. We can't do these things that go against our hearts as parents. What can we do? And there's an advocate, Pam Landhart in Minnesota, and she talks about instead of tough love, we need to learn how to love well. And so one of my aims for the book, and I have practical guides and tools in the back, things you can say to your loved ones. And I actually have a family recovery planning guide on the book website too. It's like we need to be equipped with, okay, how do we love well? Maybe not tough love, right? That's kind of this archaic way of saying how families need to show up, which is to not show up. But how do we love well with boundaries? What does that look like? So yeah, thank you for asking that question. If anyone would like to comment or has any wants to go toe to toe on any of the topics in the book, I would welcome that because I think we need to have these conversations and these dialogues and learn from each other.
Yeah, I think that's where like the enabling term bothers me for a couple of reasons. One, the stigmatizing part of it. Also, it gets misused quite a bit. Like you can say, well, they enabled them to get into treatment, which would be applauded. And then you would say,
Mhm.
well, they enabled them to use substances. So it's like, is it the enabling even the term? We're just using something to say if it was this outcome, then it was either good or bad. But the thing that
Mhm.
stands out to me the most is I hear sometimes family members then talk to other family members or to other families like that term is just it's it hurts. It's not to help, but I see, well, oh, you're enabling them because you picked up the phone call when they were calling you, or but if you did answer it and they ended up getting better, then you were applauded. So to me,
Mhm.
family members are often trying as hard as they can with something so difficult with the best that they can do, right? Like
Mhm.
I don't meet a lot of families who are trying to make it worse or trying to make things harder. It is so challenging that to me, throwing around the word enabling is, I don't know if a family member has ever been like, yeah, that really helped me feel supported, or that made me feel like I wasn't, it probably made you feel alienated. It probably made you
Mhm.
question what kind of a parent you are. And so I've just seen that word even more than others thrown around in those family spaces.
Mhm.
That is really why I appreciated your willingness to talk about it because that word does come up when we're talking about loving someone in recovery. It's
Mhm.
and you address it in such a kind way, and I appreciate your willingness to do that because I can imagine, yeah, worrying about what my people say. When I do my stigmatizing language talk, I'm always thinking that someone's gonna want to challenge me that this word isn't stigmatizing. But that willingness to talk about it is really, really important. So I do appreciate you being able to write so much about that.
Yeah, and I appreciate your advocacy in this space as well because like you shared, it has caused a lot of harm for families. And I think families dealing with this issue have enough weight to carry. Like the last thing that any of us need to feel, and I'm an affected family member too, is that more of a weight or so how do we walk alongside people to support them? Yeah, instead of kind of saying, "Hey, you're enabling this person," or kind of making this quick judgment, it's no. How can I support you? How can I help you love them? In what ways can I show up for you? There's a story of a woman I interviewed for the book, and her son was, I think, in high school at the time, and she was talking about how she was actually a part of a small group at her church. And while her son was in addiction treatment, there was another mom in that group whose daughter was going through cancer treatment. And she said, while this was all happening, the woman whose daughter was going through cancer treatment had like the red carpet rolled out, like casseroles, flowers, prayer chains, texts, calls, everybody talking about it, everyone supporting her. She said, during that same time, nobody showed up for me, and I felt so alone, but my son was sick too. And I think we need to think of when we love someone in recovery or someone struggling with substance use disorder, it's not just about the family showing up. I mean, these are strained relationships. There's oftentimes a lot of hurt. How do we show up as a community? how do we come around them? How do we build on our natural assets in a community? Maybe we're a part of a church. Maybe we're a part of a connected neighborhood. How do we build off of some of our other networks, other family, other friends, so we don't have to do it alone? And so my hope is that when families read this book, when people read this, that their eyes can be open to having more compassion, not just for their loved ones, but maybe for their community too, and learn other ways to kind of step in and help when it's hard, when it's hard to love someone who's struggling.
What you've been going all around, you've been on some tours, you've been in different places. Uh, how has that been? What has the interactions been like with people who you've been sharing your book with and talking with? What has been some of like this early reaction to these conversations and events that you've been having? I'm very curious to know how those have been. What are some of the big takeaways that you have experienced? I know you've probably got quite a bit of them already.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, it's been an awesome experience, I have to say. Bit tiring. I'm ready for a little bit of a slower season. But I think hearing over and over again people saying, "I need this book. I know someone." I think that we all know someone who's in recovery. I mean, we do. We all know someone who might be struggling, and I think just that affirmation of, we're in this together and we need to just keep doing the work because, I think the statistics are still, what is it, 220 people a day are still losing their life to opioid overdose. And, you know, rates of certain substance use has gone down. Alcohol use among women, for example, which is an amazing. Cannabis use, however, is that going? There's so substance use is still a challenge, and substance use disorder, and we need everybody in the game. We need family advocates, we need people inner seeking recovery, we need people who are still actively using to help inform the directions that we're going. We need everyone in the game to be able to continue to help address this. And I think with changing, things are always changing at the federal level with funding and this and that. We need to just get creative. We need to be innovative. And so I think, ultimately what I'm feeling and finding at these different places from, I've spoken in little churches to bookstores, to just, treatment centers, is everyone knows someone and this book is needed. And I'm just excited to keep getting the word out. So I'm encouraging people, and if listeners, like, share the book with someone who loves you. And if you're a person in recovery, and if you're an affected family member, like, grab the book, just have the book. I had a friend say, she thinks every family should have this book to be ready, because at some point you will know someone in recovery. Now, of course, my publisher will be really happy if everyone gets the book. But all jokes aside, like, it's really, really important. So, yeah. And I am excited for this, recovery advocacy, for just this space to continue to grow and innovate and adjust our conversation, adjust our messaging to be able to help more people.
One thing about your book that I'm really grateful for, and this is how you ended part of your book. It's not going to be the end of our conversation, but I think this is really important. You do talk about towards the end a note on grief,
Mm.
and I was not expecting that, because it's not how a lot of books are in general, where then it talks about the grief that happens, and I thought it was so important because no one really does. It's so hard to talk about. And, it's usually like at the end of a book, you want to provide all this hope and encouragement. And yet you really decided to actually talk about, the grief and loss that happens with this. And I think that's really, really important, because also the work that I've done, and I'm sure things that you've experienced, is I've also worked alongside, counseled, people who have lost those to substance use. And I was just at a conference yesterday with the Wisconsin Memorial Quilts and
Mm.
all of that. So I I just wanted to one give you your flowers for being willing to write about that because I just haven't seen anyone really being willing to, and understandable. It's a really, really heavy topic, and it's really, really hard when you're also trying to motivate, encourage, provide hope and support and resources. Can you talk a little bit about why that was important to write about? Because it could have been not in there, and I don't think anyone would have been like, well, why wasn't this in there? Why wasn't this talked about? But that was so important. And I really just wanted to know where that came from.
Yeah. So after having so many conversations with people who have lost loved ones and experiencing, I talk about this in that kind of appendix section, losing someone that I was close to while writing the book. Um, it's also a part of the journey. It's a part of the recovery experience, whether it touches our family personally or whether, we know of someone who's experienced loss. I felt I would be doing a disservice to family members and loved ones if I did not include that section. And I think the hardest part for me was figuring out, and for my editor, where it lived. Like, where does this live? Because, like you said, it didn't, you know, talking about the subtitle of my book, A Hopeful Guide to Understanding Addiction, a little bit of a challenge end on, a note on grief. But again, I felt like I would be just doing a disservice to these women, these families that I've met who've lost children. And it is and can be a part of the experience. And so I think we need to not, like I shared earlier, shy away from tough conversations, you know, not shy away from having the hard conversations about what this is really. And I think when we're talking about loving someone in recovery and, your loved one might still be struggling, acknowledging that can be a part of the experience. Certainly we don't want that for anyone. And you've walked alongside. I mean, it's excruciating to sit in a room with someone who's lost a child um, to this. So yeah, it was tough, Andrew. And I'd say, I don't know if folks have, there's an audiobook and I narrate the audiobook. I lost it when I was reading that section and they left it in the audiobook. It broke me to read it aloud and experience that and feel that. I think one of the things that came from that was I've identified a new need. We need more information and resources for families about loss, addiction loss. And it's just not there. A part of me is like, and I don't want to be the one to write that book because that's going to be really hard because that's going to involve talking to loved ones who've lost folks. That's going to involve a lot of research on hard topics. Oh, I'm getting like emotional thinking about it. I don't know if that's my next project, but I know that we need to talk about it. So, um, yeah, thank you for asking that question. Again, no one has asked me that yet, Andrew. I feel like this is, I think, the best interview that I've had yet. And I've talked to, this will be like, I've done more than 40 interviews. Your questions are so thoughtful. And I really appreciate you kind of drawing out some of the important parts of the book that matter. So thank you.
Yeah, and I know you seem to be a person who just wants to keep doing more, trying to figure out how we can do better. But I do want to recognize that like that chapter, you made a very difficult topic that a lot of us can relate to, a lot of us that we deal with, and yet there's not much out there. And it didn't necessarily remove the loss, but you writing about it created a pathway to sit with it in spaces where there just isn't a lot for that right now. So I think that is so important that it was there and not easy. So I just wanted to, that's why I give you that recognition because it's just something that not a lot of people are willing to do. And I know you want to do more and everything, but this is such a great thing that is beyond what we normally have. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
One of the concepts that I wanted to just talk to you about was circle of chairs.
Mhm.
I think we get used to that. I've done group counseling for so much of my work, and it's all those, you think of going to a support meeting, circle of chairs. That is sort of an easy thing to imagine when we think of treatment, recovery, when we think of addiction, but also like support, community. Circle of Chairs is a pretty simple thing for us to connect with. What does that mean to you? And you had that as one of your later parts in the book, sort of like towards the ending of it. So can you talk to a little bit about us with that concept idea to you about what that means, the circle of chairs?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I actually have a Substack letter too. I don't know if you're not a subscriber, you should subscribe, Andrew, and your listeners. But I have a Substack letter called Circle of Chairs. I feel like, and like you shared, we can all kind of imagine that, like as a really kind of visual, this image. I'm a very visual thinker. So if we think about a circle of chairs, if you've ever sat in one, it's a really vulnerable thing. I remember when I was in addiction treatment, if there wasn't a table in front of me, like a actual physical barrier, I felt so exposed. And I think a circle, if you think about an open circle, I mean, our knees are facing each other, we're making eye contact. It's a very vulnerable place to be in, especially in early recovery. And it's so healing. And I think that for me, my beginning of my healing started in circles because I needed a place where I could be completely vulnerable and honest about the hard things that I had been through. And I needed to hear the stories of other people who'd also experienced what I had. I started talking about how I felt so different because I had lived such a hard life, as a child. Um, but I started to understand that I wasn't so different and that there was a place where I belonged and there were people that I connected to. And it wasn't just through the hard things, it was also through the joyful things and the happy things. I've been in a lot of different types of recovery spaces from 12 step to faith based to all recovery, harm reduction spaces. There's just something, this thread that runs through when we're in this space. And so, whether it's like a physical, literal, like you're actually sitting in a circle, or you can just imagine it. I think it just invites us to this vulnerability that can really bring us. I mean, I use the word recovery, but really, what are we talking? I think it's just about this fullness, of the human experience. How can we really be fully human, fully ourselves, and step into everything that, and I'm a believer, like I say God, that God has for us, it's through these spaces. And so yeah, I have a chapter in the book on that. And I think that one of the points, been a minute since I wrote the book. I think one of the points that I make in that is, that families need circles too. It's not just those of us in or seeking substance use disorder, addiction, recovery, mental health recovery, trauma recovery. It's all of us. We all need circles. And so I hope that loved ones are encouraged through the book to maybe take that next step. My day job, which, our mutual friend Tom Farley, he also works recovery.com. So I always love to shout out recovery.com. It's a website that has awesome resources, not just for those of us struggling, but our loved ones too. So affected family members can look for different types of mental health support, different types of care, based on their needs, based on location. So I always point folks, if you're looking for more support, if you're looking to have that circle and you're not sure where to start, recovery.com is a great place to look. There's also tons of support groups and other things in communities, local communities that can be helpful too. So yeah, families need circles too.
And speaking of coming full circles, my last question before we wrap up is the beginning of your book, the intro of your book. This is what I have highlighted under the what to expect is almost every family in the world is impacted by addiction. My hope is that soon almost every family in the world will experience and understand what it means to be in recovery. So my question to you is it is challenging sometimes to get families involved. Sometimes things have just gotten so tough, so challenging, so overwhelming where family members are seeking refuge or trying to get like a break. This may not have been the first time that something has been tried. We know the value of having families involved, but we also know sometimes family members that have a lot of reasons why they may be stepping away before trying to step into something like this. And our conversation in your book focuses so much on the recovery part. So here's my final question to you before we wrap up is how, what's your talking point or what's your way to approach families on how to help them to engage more in someone's recovery or to at least maybe understand recovery for someone they love?
Great question. I think, and part of why I wrote this book is to provide part of this piece of the puzzle, which is education. I think we need to start with informing ourselves, and of course, today with AI and all these things, you can ask Chat GPT anything. Make me dinner tonight, or plan out my groceries for the next 3 weeks. We can. There's information everywhere. We need to seek out information that's evidence based, that is well researched, that is informed by the research and by personal experience, lived experience. Um, Shout out to my book here. If this is shameless self promotion, there's also other resources that are extremely helpful. So that education piece. And then I think one of the missing parts of it is empathy. So how do we draw on empathy and compassion? And I've been there where I am at my wit's end with a loved one. I am lacking trust. I am wanting to just set all the boundaries and just not pick up the phone. I get that. When I'm feeling at my wit's end, I've had to understand that maybe it's not just my family member. Like maybe I need to look at what's going on with me too. And I've talked to other loved ones who've been like, yeah, I got to the point where I realized I needed to start focusing on taking care of myself. And I needed to start looking at how was I going to care for my own mental health? How was I going to focus on getting more sleep? Some of these basic needs that had been disrupted because the family system was so chaotic. So education, learning how to take care of ourselves, our physical health, our mental health and well-being as loved ones, maybe going to recovery.com and accessing support. And when it's really challenging, Andrew, I think we all need to remember, like we need to reach out for support. It's not just people in recovery that need circles of chairs. And that's hard to say because it's hard to do. And I've been there too. It's hard to pick up that phone. It's hard to admit that you have this going on in your family. But I think one of the huge things I hope this book challenges the misconception, the myth that it's only happening to me, that our family's the only one, because that stigma is really harming families. This internal stigma and how society still views it. Almost 100% of families today are impacted by addiction. And so you're actually, if your family's like, nope, don't know anybody, you're the odd one out. Okay. So I think families need to feel okay to ask for help, whether that's professional treatment, whether that's at your church, whether that's a community organization, a support group. And there's so many options available. And I have a resources section in my book too. So hopefully that answered it. I know there's kind of different parts to that, but as you mentioned, I think ultimately we need to remember when families engage in the recovery process, the likelihood that your family member will find and maintain recovery over the long term has increased significantly. So you want to learn how to help your family member, just show up, just listen. I think sometimes as humans, I know I do, I overcomplicate things, Showing up and loving might be just answering that text. It might be delivering a meal. My parents took me grocery shopping when I was really struggling. And I still remember that over 20 years later because it was so impactful for me. That simple action of, I'm going to buy you food because I love you and I want to care for you. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do and we can learn from each other.
I think those are great. Those are like the small takeaways that I think sometimes people are looking for the huge, big, transformative, life-changing, life pivoting, the and those moments do happen, but for a lot of times it's just how we show up every day or how we show up in those moments that those little things that just speaks with kindness and compassion makes all the difference. And not some grand gesture that is sort of going to create this magical change that those little things can really make a difference and family members to know like those are those little things that you can do for someone. All right. So this is a great conversation. I imagine we could keep talking and talking. So after our discussion or what you have going on, I know you're all over the place, really doing a lot with this. What is a final takeaway or message you'd like to leave with listeners?
Yeah. Well, I would just say don't give up hope. You know, the research also shows that hope is a proven method to supporting loved ones. And I think hope is kind of like one of those words like love. Maybe it's been overused a bit. It's just kind of this ethereal like idea. It's a feeling. But hope is actually a strategy. Like I like to say, hope has legs, like it moves. And so if you're struggling with a loved one or you want to, love your person in recovery well, just continue to have hope for them. No matter what, like any worldly indication might still be like, oh, they're still struggling a lot and they may be. Choose to have hope for that person and just don't give up. Don't give up because it gets really good. Again, it's not always easy, but it is so worth it.
Thank you so much for joining and talking about this. It's been really great. I think things that have normally been talked about in the family spaces and supporting a loved one in not just addiction, but mostly what we're talking about with recovery is going to be, I think, a real change for people and this profession and much needed. So for all that you put into it, and I know you're still going to be doing a lot of stuff. You don't seem like you're one to really slow down. You seem like you are one that like speeds up
Well,
to do
I
things.
appreciate you saying that, but I'm learning we need to slow down sometimes. So I'm not
Yeah.
ready for some self-care. Yes.
Good. You deserve it too. So for listeners, we will have ways to connect with Caroline in the podcast notes to learn more about what she's doing, her background, and especially where to get a copy of her book, When You Love Someone in Recovery, A Hopeful Guide to Understanding Addiction. Once again, thank you for joining, and it was a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Appreciate it.
What Caroline shared today is exactly why I keep making this show. There are professionals and people in recovery all over the country who need to hear conversations like this one. And the way they find us is through reviews. If this episode moved you, challenged you, or gave you something to bring back to your work, take 30 seconds on Apple Podcasts and say so. Your words are what grows this community. Scroll down the app, hit the stars, and leave a note. It means everything. I'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's Andrew J. SCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media. Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.